Hello, everyone. My name is Tapfuma, and I'm the founder of AfriFursa, where we host interviews with African diasporans who are doing amazing things with Africa from a distance. So, thank you for taking the time to check us out today. I'm here right now with Soukayna Remmal.
Hi,
Soukayna, how you doing?
thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Good, good, excellent, doing well, thanks. And I'm very excited to have Soukayna here. I first came across Soukayna's work through a fellowship she did with the School of Cities at the University of Toronto. She is a research and communications associate at the International Center for Tax and Development, which is a research center which is housed within the Monk School, which is also at the University of Toronto. But I was really excited because your work and your research had a lot to do with cities, sustainable cities across Africa. So it's an absolute pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much. It's the pleasure is shared. I'm very happy to be here, and hopefully we'll have a great discussion about sustainable cities.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you grew up in Morocco, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Um, I'm Moroccan. I grew up in Fez, Morocco. I completed my
Mhm.
undergraduate degree in Morocco as well at Al Akhawain University in Ifan, which is a Moroccan university following the American educational system. I graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in International Relations with a minor in African Studies. And during my undergrad, I got to spend a bit of time outside of Morocco. I spent a semester at Bocconi University in Italy, and I also completed a 5 month internship in Brussels with the Moroccan embassy to the EU. And after completing my undergrad, I decided to pursue a dual degree in public policy and global affairs. So it is an MPP MBA at Sciences Po in Paris and the Monk School of Global Affairs here at the University of Toronto. And and this is how I eventually came to Toronto. Upon the completion of my degree, in my degrees in June 2020, I joined directly the ICTD. So as you said earlier, it's an international research center based at the University of Toronto and the University of Brighton in Sussex. And we mostly work on fiscal policy in developing countries with the focus on Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. And so I'm really lucky to be conducting policy-oriented research in a dynamic and nurturing environment alongside really bright people, a lot of whom are Africans as well. And
Fantastic.
yeah,
Mm.
and overall, I've been here in Toronto for almost 2 years now, so I'm still
Mm.
fresh to Canada.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it sounds like you've been very, very busy. So congrats on everything that you've been able to accomplish, up to now. And tell us a bit about your fellowship. So you also had a fellowship
Mm-hmm.
with the School of Cities, which I'm a big fan of, and you focused on sustainable urbanization as an enabler of structural transformation in Africa.
Absolutely.
So for our viewers who are sitting here, and that's a mouthful, could you just unpack that for us a little bit? Tell us a bit what you discovered, what you were focused on.
Sure. Essentially, going into this fellowship, when I first applied, all I knew is that I wanted to explore this topic of urbanization of Africa because it was really close to my heart.
Mm,
I studied public policy and global affairs. I read a lot about the topic with academics and international organizations projecting different trends for the future of the continent and being either
mm,
optimistic or pessimistic. You know how it goes. And
mhm,
so I wanted to investigate the question and make my own opinion. Um, with that, I also knew that getting into the School of Cities, I would be getting mentorship in my research project, particularly from Professor Miriam Lowe,
mm.
who was the interim director of the School of Cities and who encouraged me to apply in the first place. We had been working a bit together before, and she knew my interest for research and for conducting research on Africa in particular, and she really encouraged me to apply. And I'd like to thank her again
You,
if
you know
she
what?
ever listens to this.
Yeah, just to interject for a second, she was actually on our first round table, Afri First's first round table, on sustainable, agri-food systems, especially in light of the COVID pandemic across Africa. And ever since then, and before that, I've just really been a big fan of her. She's really progressive and such an amazing resource to people like us, who are passionate about the continent. So big shout out to Professor Miriam Lowe.
Absolutely. She's such a role
Yeah.
model, proud African and Africanist scholar, and
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
great mentor. Yeah,
Fantastic.
so my fellowship project, to get back to my project, it explored the role of sustainable urbanization as an enabler of social transformation. So the main focus was on two mega trends: urbanization, rapid urbanization on the one hand, and the demographic transition on the other hand. And the two trends are there is a direct causality between the two. So rapid urbanization, which is essentially cities growing bigger and bigger every day, and the demographic transition, which is the shift from rural to urban populations, which has taken place in all other continents except Africa. The shift it took place around 2009 on average worldwide, but in Africa it's projected to take place in 2030 or 2035. And so
When you say shift, how do you quantify that? Because it is happening little by little, but is there a certain sort of threshold you're looking
yeah, so
to address? Yeah.
50% of the population being rural or urban.
Okay. I
But
see.
then that also depends on the very way you define what a rural agglomeration is and what a urban agglomeration is. So it's a bit of a handful deciding what is urban, what is rural.
Sure.
But
Okay.
but essentially, this is how people think about it. And to this day, we are approaching this momentum, which is believed to be very important to the trajectory of the development of the continent, but we're not there yet. Hence the projections and the trends. Yeah, so African policymakers today are faced with really puzzling governance challenges posed by these two mega trends, and they're imagining the cities of tomorrow. And in doing so, they have to plan for the growth and provide basic services, infrastructure, affordable housing. All these elements that are essential to meet the expanding population's needs while still designing these cities in ways that make them sustainable and equipped to face the challenges of climate change. So in my project, I wanted to investigate the opportunities and the challenges associated with rapid urbanization, as well as its drivers and impact, and then really come up with policy responses or recommendations, if you will, that could ensure that the rural-urban shift and population growth will not outpace the service delivery in the cities. And yeah, so that is
I
really,
see. Yeah.
mind you,
So
it was before the COVID pandemic, which brought a whole new breadth of challenges for
yeah,
national and local
whole new
government,
dimension.
and a new
Yeah.
range of policy issues.
So when I heard you present your research on it, one of the things that really piqued my interest is that you referenced the idea that the rapidly growing population, across Africa and urbanization. I mean, some speak about it as an existential threat to Africa, but you spoke about it as full of opportunities. Can you just explain to us what some of those opportunities are?
Yeah, for sure. So, as you said, urbanization is also referred to as an untapped tool, and how Africans deal with it or not is believed to be crucial for the continent's future. The fear that people have here really is to see rapid urbanization outpace the urban economic growth. But I'm not of that opinion. I think cities are drivers of economic development across the globe. We have seen that before. Cities are the world's major growth engine, and they generate
Yeah.
growth, and they have helped millions of people lift themselves out of extreme poverty. We've seen that with Asia and with Africa as well, actually. And cities provide an environment that enables economic development. Urban areas the main part of the GDP globally and in Africa is accounted for in cities. In
Right.
Africa, it's like 60% of the GDP that is generated in cities, and
Hmm.
cities are also magnets for talents and magnets for investments. They allow for economies of scale in public service provision. They are dynamic environments. They allow
Hmm.
workers to be closer to jobs. They increase opportunities. They bring people together. And from a governance perspective as well, cities are innovative and efficient public policy laboratories. Cities, the policy making process is generally less stratified than in cities than it is at the level of national centralized settings.
Hmm.
In saying so, I also need to say that decentralization does not necessarily entail more efficiency, and the success is conditional to the institutional capacity we put into it and the resource allocated to the transfer of responsibilities from a level of government to another one. But it is a great place to test and try policies and see how they work.
Sure.
It's really a great place to have context sensitive and context specific policies.
Hmm. Obviously, a lot of your research was focused on policy. What role do you see the private sector? Because as you rightly said, cities are engines of economic growth, and they're key to a lot of industry, and business. So what role do you see the private sector is playing in helping develop or create sustainable transitions?
Well, I think the private sector has a big role to play
Mhm.
in that sense, but it might be there. It comes up a lot that the private sector can be mostly interested in economic profit. It's not necessarily want it to be conditional to social development and inclusivity. But then
Mhm.
comes the role of the policymakers. As much as we want the private sector, as much as like in cities we want to attract investment, it's also important to make sure that Africa is not going to go through a process of development at the cost of social issues, and we have to make sure that while cities are providing a good ecosystem for business, it's also for businesses. It's also an environment where people can thrive, and where the governments provide them with their
The
needs.
right tools, yeah. It's an interesting what you're alluding to is so interesting because when you look at the process of development of a lot of old cities and you look at the whole process of industrialization, there
Absolutely.
was so much like social fallout, like a lot of like poor social practices and just inequalities that came out of that and so on. And Africa at the same time is almost like held to a standard where all these major advanced economies had the opportunity to make their mistakes, and now they're coming, to Africa at the same time and saying like, okay, well, yeah, we want to see development, but you can't make the same mistakes we made. I see a positivity in that, but then I also want to ask you, how do we do that in a way that also allows cities to make mistakes, not perhaps not costly. I don't know what you call costly, not costly, but how do we almost be fair and not hold African cities to unfair, unrealistic standards?
I absolutely agree with you. We there is a lot of literature on that topic, specifically. Actually, many
Mm,
from developing countries are claiming that African cities should not be held to higher standards, or developing countries in general, and that it's not because we didn't get to industrialize in, for example, by relying on fossil energy or
yeah.
unsustainable means, that we can't do that because of the state of climate change as it is today. But I think that the two are not mutually exclusive, and there is an imperative for us to do more with less.
Mm,
African cities have potential to leapfrog. It's true that there are so many new technologies that can allow us to design cities in ways and that are not necessarily unfriendly to the climate. And I
Right.
think I think particularly with regards to urbanization, it's an imperative. It's not a choice. Sustainability is an
Mm,
imperative today, and as Africans, we don't want to damage our environment either. Economic development, yes, but not at the cost of social issues, not at the cost of environmental issues. I think
yeah.
that's something
Yeah.
that's really
And
important.
and you know, if there's anything that's probably also encouraging is, you know, I come from one of the hats I wear is in private equity, and in terms of investment, there is, you know, a move towards ESG. I mean, it's been there for a while, but it's becoming more and more important. I think in the light of COVID, people have realized that, you know, we got to get our priorities right. Otherwise, we can have events like COVID that are generated by the climate, or you know, or by something else. So there's a movement towards that, and I think that's also encouraging.
Absolutely.
Um,
And if not
yeah,
for us, for the next generations, if not for us, for this continent that is so youthful and that has so much to offer in the future. And we don't want to do the same mistakes they might have developed at the cost of their environment, but we don't need to do the same. And the
yeah,
technology allows us not to do that today.
sure. And you touched on an important point, the fact that Africa is so youthful. So you know, when we look at the demographic and how much youth there actually is across the continent, what role do you see youth playing specifically in developing sustainable cities?
Well, I think cities can be catalysts of youth empowerment, and there are a number of policies that need to be directed at youth to give them the tools to create the sustainable cities of tomorrow. We cannot put this heavy weight on their shoulders without empowering them, without giving them the necessary tools for that. So, through improving human capital, by providing equal access to education and healthcare services, and also allowing different categories to meet the labor market needs. And we should also provide integrated infrastructure services that target the marginalized group, including the youth and the women, for example. And
Mm,
I think something something that we really need to take into account is that young people should also be included in the policy making processes, and we have seen it all across the continent. Um, young people are young Africans are talented, and Africa is one of the best places for entrepreneurship, for example. And
absolutely.
once it's really all about putting the right tools in the hands of young people, and they will carry the continent forward.
Mm, mm, hmm. Yeah. Thanks for that. I just can't remember the example now, but one of the youngest ministers, also a woman, I think in Southern Africa. I want to say Botswana. I might be wrong, but yeah, really impressive young people who are so innovative and are so committed. You
Absolutely. I
know.
recently was
Yeah.
I attended a talk with a minister from Togo, a woman as well, super
Yeah.
young, Minister of Technology and Communication, leading
Mm,
the response to COVID with through new
yeah.
technology. Really amazing. Uh,
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So just practically on in terms of creating space for youth to be engaged in policy making. Um, have you encountered in any of your research any challenges to that? Because I also know that, you know, in a lot of our contexts, seniority is really important, you know, on the continent. You know, and I just want to know, have there been any challenges, would you say there?
I think it is absolutely relevant to mention the cultural aspects that come
Mm,
play with regards to policy making and regarding um, older people as more as wiser or able to provide a better understanding of what the future should be like. But I think there are more and more initiatives across the continent actually to include youth in policymaking and give them a voice and have their insights on what they feel like the needs of their cities should be like, and include them in the design, even the urban planning, and all these things. And actually, young people are also used, like they tend to care more about environmental issues, and as such they would be more inclined towards sustainable urbanization than older generations. And it's in my opinion, it's a matter of creating space for youth in the decision making, in the boardrooms, in the city councils, in all these things. And there is a move towards this more democratic setting. Also, obviously, with management specifically, but some of our societies today are not exactly super democratic, and with that comes also it comes at the cost of people's involvement in policy design and policy making. But we those
Sure.
who are democratizing and developing.
Yeah, yeah, it's been a very contentious issue, even with some of the elections that have happened recently and some of the younger kind of contestants, in different regions. But personally, my view is that I think integration is the way to go, where it doesn't become sort of you're looking for one end of the spectrum, the old kind of struggle heroes and veterans versus, young people. Because in some of our cultures, there's also some incredible communal values and practices, which I've witnessed, which um, have not passed down necessarily to a lot of my peers. And I think that if we were able to kind of take the best of both worlds in a very idealistic world, we could have something beautiful
Absolutely,
and sustainable.
absolutely, I totally agree.
Yeah,
Urban
yeah.
matters, and having people,
Mm,
young people, learn from older people, and also be able to speak up to them and
yeah,
share their mind is very important. And we need to
yeah.
create kinds of ecosystems.
Yeah. Well, still on this topic of urbanization, one of the things that we also have, sometimes very much as a legacy of colonization and how cities were set up is informal settlements. And in some cases, we have these massive, sprawling informal settlements that have next to no infrastructure, no running water, no potable water, no electricity. So in terms of developing sustainably, and urbanization happening sustainably, how do you solve that issue?
Um, well, I think that's a really big issue.
It's a big question, so yeah, I mean, well, let's take a stab at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's very important to acknowledge that the current state of cities and governance of cities is also defined by their past, and in the case of African cities, their colonial legacy. Actually, during
Mm,
my research, I came across the differences in urban planning and urban design between cities that were in French colonies and cities that were in British colonies, and
mm,
the difference is very interesting in the sense that the legacy is not just the physical legacy, but also the governance methods, and
mm,
that affected the trajectories, the development trajectory and the urbanization trajectories of countries and cities. And I think, yeah, I think it is a challenge for. I think and informal settlements are a challenge for the continent, and
mm,
Africa is actually the continent that has the most the highest rate of informal settlements in the world. We're at like 60% of the sub-Saharan African population living in what would be defined as slums, while the average one was at like 30%.
mm,
Africa also has more urban poor than any other region in the world, but I think it's important to integrate. There are some really clear good practices in integrating informal settlements with developing centers in cities, and that would be through, for example, providing basic, as you said, basic services such as transportation, electricity, clean water, and also making sure that the cities are not growing into infinite agglomerations, but as cities, in the sense that it's an environment with service provision where people can walk to work or go to work in an efficient way, where uh, we have schools or all these things. And unfortunately, a lot of cities have developed as an industrial unit on the one side and people living in slums on the other. And it's a big challenge in urban planning. I'm not an urban planner, and I can't really speak to the exact modalities of implementation of these policies, but it's something we have witnessed across the continent, and more and more people are calling for a better integration and better design of cities into livable environments.
I lived in South Africa for quite some time, and the whole migrant labor system has a terrible legacy because you had all these men living in these hostels, they'd call it, just outside of industry, so almost like a slum close to where they'd be working. And now they're supposed to house families, but they're not prepared for that at all, and it's just a really, really terrible legacy.
Exactly, absolutely.
Yeah, but when you talk about like the infinite sprawl or growth of these cities, curious to know what you think about megacities, because Africa is supposed to have, I think, the majority of megacities in the world in the next 30 years or so, right? So what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm around megacities in the global south in general, and megacities are great engines of growth. But in the case of Africa, it's important to keep in mind that not the whole continent is going to develop as a megacities. It's not all Lagos and Kinshasa and Cairo, Johannesburg. And in fact, urbanization is gonna be mostly through smaller urban areas. So I actually have a number here. By 2025, it's estimated the urban population will live mainly in small cities. Like 42% of the population will be living in small cities, and medium-sized cities. Something like 24% of the African population living in medium-sized cities. So these qualify as cities that have one to 5 million inhabitants and 5 to 10 million, whereas megacities, by definition, have 10 million inhabitants or more. And as much as I support the enthusiasm for megacities, I think we need to also look into these smaller, medium-sized cities, as since they are the really heart of this urbanization, rapid urbanization.
Sure. Okay. And then another thing I just wanted to ask you about here is the whole, I think a lot of research that you might have come across, I'm not sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we tend to differentiate between sub-Saharan Africa and then North Africa, right? In terms of what you see regarding the necessary steps for sustainable urbanization, is it similar across North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, or is it quite different in these regions?
Okay, so something I always say whenever I talk about this topic, I think it's really important, and I always find it a bit condescending people say Africa, Africa. It's important to underline Africa is not a monolithic block, and there are differences that translate in regional and intranational differences when it comes to urbanization dynamics and also governance conditions. And African countries have been going through diverse paths and phases of urbanization. While it's true that North African countries have essentially, I think North Africa is always studied as a country as like part of the MENA region, and then so they're not accounted for in when IOs write reports on Africa. They just take North Africa as a gray area, and then they study Sub-Saharan Africa, and then make another report on the MENA region. And that's something that's a bit problematic for us because at the end of the day, even when it comes to African countries working together towards similar goals, it comes in the way, like these kinds of things
Yeah,
come in the way. In my
I
opinion, they are
can imagine.
unnecessary. And
Mhm.
a lot of the challenges faced in Southern Africa are shared by countries in Northern Africa. And
Mm.
in my opinion, that's not a very relevant separation.
Separation. Yeah.
I think the challenges that are there are challenges that are regional and continental and shared by all the regions. But it's interesting that some regions have faced those challenges already, and some regions are yet to face them, and so they can learn from each other. For example, with an example that comes to mind, I have some slides on it. I can share with you later if you'd
Hmm.
like. With
Hmm.
regards to electrification, North Africa has 97% of the population has access to electricity, whereas that's
Hmm.
something that West Africa, for example, is struggling with. But what we need to encourage and here is continental dialogue, sharing good practices,
Hmm.
also not shying away from sharing failures and learning from those failures as we are implementing and designing the cities of tomorrow in different regions.
Hmm. Okay,
And
fantastic. Yeah.
I think that at a continental level, there has been a lot of discussions. We have shared the 2063 agenda. We have the
Yeah.
African Union and the African Development Bank doing terrific work as well when it comes to encouraging intercontinental dialogue.
Yeah.
And those efforts are very promising, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. And even the Continental Free Trade Area, as an initiative of the AU, yeah, it just makes so much sense that we would have a stronger interconnection. Sorry, what was that?
And the recent agreements on intercontinental movement and allowing people to
Yeah,
settle in different countries
right.
also
Yeah,
very important.
yeah. So policy alignment is really important for this to work on a regional level, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. I think there's a
Yeah.
momentum for African leadership
Hmm.
uh, and to collaborate at a continental level.
Mm, wow. So, I think there's so much more I could pick your brain on, but I want to be fair to you. And, I also want to be fair to the viewers to keep this within a certain time frame. But so I have one more question for you,
Mhm.
which is this. So if there was one city in Africa that you could play a role in, a central role in shaping the sustainable urbanization policy for that city, what city would it be? One city.
Well, I wouldn't want to intrude on anyone else, so I would probably pick, uh, let's say, Casablanca,
Yeah.
Morocco,
Okay.
because it's always talked about as the heart of the Moroccan economy. But
Mm,
I went so many times to Casablanca, and I've seen a lot of sad realities of the city.
mm,
I think while the city has developed in a very rapid span of time, we have also a lot of inequalities and social injustice visible. That is, as in
mm.
slums and really, I mean, very common to the continent as well. But
Sure.
yeah, I think
So that's where you would.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would pick Casablanca. I would try to have a positive impact in on my country's economic development. But I have to
Wow.
say,
Yeah.
I really regret not having had the opportunity to travel much across the continent, and that's
Mm,
a personal ambition of mine. I hope that once COVID is behind us, uh,
mm.
more across the continent and discover more of it. Um,
Fantastic. Yeah. And there's so much work to do across the entire continent. So
okay.
I think the skill set that you're developing and the research that you've developed, the body of knowledge is really, really critical. At AfriFursa, really believe that cities are the stage on which sustainability will either be won or lost. So, yeah, I think they're critical.
They represent Forza in and of themselves, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Opportunities. Yeah. So, Kana, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing from your wealth of knowledge and insights into this really important topic.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much, and for the great discussion. And I'll be on the lookout for more of these conversations by Africa.
Thank you, thank you, and thank you to the viewers. Thank you so much for watching this, taking this in. Please do hit like and drop a comment below. You will find us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And check out the video description for where you can follow Soukayna, find out more about her, and probably even get in touch for some of the websites that she mentioned.
For sure. Happy to share any resources.
Thanks, Soukayna.
Thank you so much.
All right.